why would God incarnate, the creator of the entire universe, spend the vast, vast majority of his life in utter, anonymity in little backwater town of Nazareth doing manual labor? Like, he could have just appeared in the desert at age 30 and that would have been fine. St. Josemaria's thesis was that he did that to show us that the mundane and both the combination of the mundane, ordinary things of life, family, living in a little village, going to work every day, but then also work is a part of the salvific plan of God and is part of our own redemption. I mean, that Jesus was a carpenter or blacksmith and doing mundane tasks as God of the universe. That's completely insane. But that is the example that he gave us. Where the value, the redemptive and salvific value comes is in the love that's put into it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Catholic Founders. I'm your host, Silas Maynor. On Catholic Founders, we are on a mission to understand how to be Catholic business owners, how to truly be an instrument of God's will in the world. Before we start, I do have an ask. We are looking for sponsors to help fund the growth of this show and the production of this show and just the community that we're building. So if you are interested in sponsoring both the podcast and or the newsletter, reach out to us at admin@catholicfounders.com to learn more. This is a great way to get in front of hundreds of Catholic business owners on a weekly basis to just remind them of who you are and get in front of them. All right, folks, you are in for a treat today. We are joined by Rob Hayes. If you do not know who Rob is, I'm very excited to be able to introduce you to him. Rob spent about 20 years in the hospitality industry, ultimately culminating in his becoming CEO of a publicly traded hospitality company or a hotel brand. And that's not the most interesting part. The most interesting part is that he took over as CEO right as COVID was starting. Yeah, hotels, COVID, you get the picture. This means that overnight, they ended up losing 95% of their revenue. He had to furlough thousands of employees. They were on the brink of filing for bankruptcy, but in the end, they made it through. And today, Rob is between ventures. He does some investing and mentoring of founders. I'm sure you will hear more from Rob in the near future about what he's up to next. I won't share that here. Because of all of these experiences, Rob has a wealth of knowledge on how to keep the faith front and center during challenging times and very busy times. The key themes of today's conversation are why we should pursue prestige in our work. I won't get into that too much more. It's a really interesting conversation. Why it's important to allow the mundane tasks of life and entrepreneurship to sanctify us. How to maintain a spiritual life and a prayer life, even as the CEO of a publicly traded company. And finally, how to be daring in our work. As we get started, I do ask the Holy Spirit to just come upon you and allow your heart to be opened to whatever it is that God is calling you to take away from this conversation today. Okay, let's get into it. All right, welcome to the podcast, Rob. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Doing great.
I am extremely excited to have you. We've been meaning to get this on the books for a while. You're the first guest that kind of gave me homework to look at before we could get you on the pod. So I had to research because you've done a bunch of podcasts. You did this mini series with what's the name of the podcast? The St. Josemaria Escriva
It's called
Institute?
New Horizons. New Horizons with the St. Josemaria Institute.
Yeah, and it was I knew it was going to be good, but I was listening to it and I was just like I had to keep rewinding and slow it down because I usually listen quite fast. Slow it down.
You didn't put me on 5x speed.
Not quite that much, but and I was like, I have to really consider these things because it was very good. So I encourage people to check that out. But I did a bit of research on some of your takes beforehand. Let's start off with this idea of prestige. So St. Josemaria Escriva talks about this need to advance our profession so that we are more prestigious, right? And I would like you to explain this more because it sounds kind of counterintuitive. Like, why would we want to be prestigious? Doesn't that sound kind of like pride? Like, give us your take there.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. And as I mentioned on the podcast that I did, it hit me one day when I was actually at this meeting, this get together, and they were doing an examination of conscience. And one of the questions was about, am I working in a way or a certain level of excellence in order to increase my prestige? And I thought, that's weird. I've never thought of prestige as Christian duty or even really as part of my Christian vocation. And if anything, it's the opposite. Like, I want to be humble. I want to be meek. Why would I seek prestige? But what I think St. Josemaria in particular, who talks about this, what he's talking about really is about vocation and personal apostolate. That in a very simple way, who cares about what something someone says who is bad at what they do.
Mhm.
If you wouldn't ask someone that you consider to be a terrible parent for parental advice, right?
I hope not.
You wouldn't ask somebody who's a terrible executive to be, what's your business secret? Like, there's a certain desire we all have to inquire of those who are good at what they do about how to learn. And it's the same thing just in a very basic sense with our Christian faith, that if we are true followers of Jesus Christ and we really are people of prayer and contemplation, we always talk about that's people are drawn to us because of that. Well, in many ways, that is a level of prestige, right? It is people hold you in esteem because of who you are and what you stand for. And so it's not, it's always through this lens of humility, and it's always through this lens of vocation. But the way that I think about it is I frame that as an output that you don't control. In the same way that when you set goals, your goal shouldn't be like, I want to be the CEO of a company, or I want to get to, your fundamental goal for life is I want to get to 100 million in revenue. Like, yes, it's not that you don't have goals that you're trying to achieve, but they're never through the lens of that's who I am and that's what I want to be. And so you have to be careful about focusing all your effort on outputs, on outcomes. And what I make the argument in the podcast, and just for my own consideration over time, is what you can control are the inputs. And that's where excellence comes in, of really striving, recognizing whatever role you're in, whether as an entrepreneur, as a business builder, as a father, as a husband, as a spouse, that I can control the inputs of what I do for that. And if I do that well, and if I am in fact excellent at those things, there very well likely will be prestige that comes from it.
Mhm.
Other people will look to you because of that. And so therefore it is a tool to wield for the sake of the gospel, for the sake of souls, for the sake of human flourishing and your vocation. Again, it's always through this lens of, I think excellence as an input is the key part rather than a sort of prestige as the output.
Interesting. So in the end there, you're saying that in part, it's if we want to share the gospel with others, we want to be the type of people, you don't necessarily do it for this reason, but when you have prestige, people will come to you, and that allows you to have more influence over more people to bring them closer to God in general. That's like one of the potential outputs of having prestige, correct?
Yeah, you've got to have credibility,
Mm-hmm.
right? You've got to have credibility, and it's credibility in terms of, is what is coming out of your mouth, does it ring true? But even before that, are you even somebody that I think I can ask these questions and get a response? And so that prestige, I think, is the I guess is the attraction, is the bait
Yeah.
for people to even want to engage with you.
Yeah. Now, I could imagine somebody thinking about this and then going to the extreme, the other end of the spectrum, and saying, well, if I have to maximize my prestige, then they kind of just go all in on it, and maybe they neglect their family duties or whatnot. So can you explain kind of how to hold those two things in balance as well?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. Again, all of this is through the lens of again, unity of life. I mean, it's this idea that every part of our life is a seamless garment. And I don't necessarily love the discussions always of work-life balance. I think even that sometimes can silo different things. And it's just always an ongoing structure, a strategy about priorities. And you have to know that your family life is a priority, your faith life, your prayer life, your life of piety is a priority, your business and your professional life are priorities. But it's always ebbing and flowing. And that's why you have to be a person of prayer, so that you have the discernment to be able to know how to constantly be reordering those priorities on a practical basis every day when you get up. And knowing that I know that I need to spend time with my spouse, and I know I need to spend time with my children. I know I got to spend time with my company. I know I need to spend time with the Lord. How do I do this? Well, the only way you do that is by being a person who really grounds themselves in prayer and gets up and fights every day for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I always think it's about priorities rather than balance.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I think that I kind of like the Jeff Bezos version of it, the work-life harmony. In a way, it's like that's I think it reflects a little bit more how we would look at it as Catholics, around like there is no it's not two different things. Jeff Schaffelbein is really great at this, right? This like, I am Jeff at work, I'm Jeff at home, I'm Jeff at church, right? Like I'm still Jeff. I have to make sure I'm a good Jeff everywhere I go. And I think that's a great kind of component about it. With I mean, you've been in very, I guess you could say, like high level executive roles in a publicly traded company. How do you focus on, like, again, as entrepreneurs or high level executives, it can be so hard to just not let that consume you because there is so much responsibility on you. How do you know where to draw the line that God is calling me to these responsibilities? Because in your case, you had, I don't even know how many employees under you that you were responsible for their well being effectively. Like, how do you balance that with then like the times when, hey, things are going crazy at home, I need to spend time with my kids or my wife? Like, how did you kind of work through that mentally?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it, at least on the professional side, and this was particularly true for me, as you know, but maybe your listeners don't. I was in the hotel business for 20 something years. And then, and like you said, ran it for as a CEO for the last five. And those 5 years were COVID. That's when I
Easy.
took over. Yeah, I took over in early 2020. So every day, the first several years of my role was the house is burning to the ground. How do you deal with that? And then how do you still be engaged with in my case, my wife and my children? But I have this vocation to this work and trying to live the faith. And one thing that I had to come to grips with, because it was the only way as well that I could deal with, frankly, what was fairly serious anxiety that I'd never dealt with in my life before, but it was very strong during this period of time because so much was out of my control, is I learned to do something that I called, I don't know what to call it, than execution mode. And one of the things that I would do was I'd get into the office pretty early. Yeah, I'd try to go to mass early and then get to the office early. And I'd spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes in some combination of time of prayer just to spend some time with the Lord because I didn't know how else to do it. Really plan out my day in terms of, all right, here are 30 balls in the air that I've got. And how do I push each of those things along today? And so here are the tasks of which I have going on, and here's what I want to do. And yes, I know I'm going to get some grenades thrown at me during the day as well. But I needed to have the tangible list of things that I was going to do so that I knew that if I accomplished these things today, it was enough, that I could give myself permission then to shut off
Yeah.
at whatever time in order to go home. Now, that didn't mean that after I got home and spent some time with my wife and with kids, dinner, giving the kids bath, putting them down. That didn't mean that back at 8:30 o'clock, 8:30, I wasn't back at it because there were still things that I needed to push along. But the only way that I could give myself permission to turn off and not think about all of the things that are going on was to have a concrete, tangible, discrete list of things that I needed to do. And when I got them done, I could give myself permission to turn
Yeah.
off for a while.
No, I like that. It's because it's with entrepreneurship or just any executive role as well. There is a never ending list of things you could do. And we need to recognize that there is no possible way we can do them all. So therefore we have to kind of draw a line and say, I trust in God to like not burn the building down. Like I trust that everything's gonna be fine. I find
Well,
this really challenging.
no, it is. It's extremely shy. But I will tell you one of the most important things that I did, and it wasn't something that I discussed with anybody in my company, but I did mention this on one of the panels that was on Scent at the Scent conference last year, where there's a friend of mine who lives in Fort Worth. He manages money and he does stuff in the public markets. And he said, "Yeah, I heard you were named CEO." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, it sounds like you're in a pretty tough place in the hotel business." And I said, "Yeah, that's an understatement." And he said, "Well, have you considered consecrating your company to Our Lady and to the Lord?" And I thought, no, I hadn't thought about that. And so one thing that I did was once I was at the board meeting virtually on Zoom, when I was officially approved as the CEO, I turned off Zoom, and I had found these old prayers of consecration and got on my knees and prayed several prayers of just offering the whole company, its outcome, whatever happens. I mean, because we were very close to filing bankruptcy, so I was losing a lot of money. I didn't know if it was going to make it, and so that's what I did. And what helped me was that combination of here are the things that I tangibly can do, and here's what I can control. And as we mentioned earlier, the inputs that I can control, because I can't control all the outcomes. I can't control what the banks are going to do, what my other lenders, my other partners, I can't control them. All I can control is my stuff and this list of things that I'm doing. And then after that, I just have to tell our Lord and tell Our Lady, like, this is your deal now. I've done my
Mm-hmm.
part. I'm doing what I can do. You're gonna have to deal with the rest because I don't know what else to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that ability to have a certain level of detachment from the outcomes and just trust is, I mean, it's one of the most important things I think you can do as an entrepreneur and as a business builder. Otherwise, you'll drive yourself crazy.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good point. I also, in some ways, I feel like it is the kind of crux of what it means to be Catholic entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurship in general, I mean, a lot of people start becoming they become an entrepreneur because they want to have control over their time, where they live, like they're sick of reporting to HR, yada yada yada. That was at least me. And then you go into the situation where you actually have in some cases you have way less control than before, and you have to just release it to them. So I think it is a sort of like the crux of what it means to be Catholic entrepreneurs, releasing everything to God, because we know that even just like in regular life, if you're not a business owner, that is the point of life, is to trust in God for everything, as we pray in the Our Father, right? It is like, it's the way that if you welcome it, it's the way that you can come closer to Him and become a saint through being an entrepreneur. Would you agree with that? Hey guys, Silas Maynor here. If you'd like to host a Catholic Founders Meetup in your area, reach out to us today and we'll help you organize it. It's not good for us to build alone. It's better to work together with the other Catholic business owners in our community so that we can assert our influence and bring the culture back to God. But all of this starts with knowing who the other Catholic business owners are. It starts with friendship, whether that's over breakfast, over bagels, going to adoration and spending some time together for drinks afterwards, doesn't really matter. We can't do this without friendship. Reach out to us at admin@catholicfounders.com and we will help you organize your event, get started, and promote it. Thank you for being part of this community.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think what we sometimes forget is that we are terrible at judging what is what is good and what is bad, and what is for our benefit, and what are the graces and blessings that come from our situations. I mean, it is very true that I can say at the same time that it was extraordinarily hard and very difficult, and I wouldn't want to live through what I did. And at the same time, it was one of the greatest blessings that God has given me in my professional career, because it primed me and prepared me for what is to come. And so we're just not very good at determining, how to grow from things. Sometimes we can't see it in our moment, but God does. And if you don't have this idea that of detachment of the outcome and trust that God is in control, I don't know how you make it through the trials and struggles and failures, and unscathed, or approach it in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do, though, you'll look back and be incredibly grateful for all of the gut punches and difficulties and failures, because it made you into the man or woman that you needed to be for
Yeah.
your future vocation.
I mean, that's a really fascinating point. You've got countless stories of people who have built ministries that really are only possible because of the fact that they had to endure some kind of like crazy experience in life or long enduring pain. I was thinking about Anthony D'Ambrosio with his whole like sleep thing, right? His inability to sleep, and how this all kind of led to Triumph of the Heart and some of the other projects they're working on. And it's like, if he didn't have that story, it wouldn't really matter to most of us. Like, we wouldn't really resonate with it as much. It wouldn't be as impressive. But he had to go through that in order to be able to share that with the world. And there's many such examples of this with the saints and everything. So it's such a paradox, right? Like, we kind of pursue entrepreneurship in a lot of cases because we're trying to, I don't know, maybe we don't think about this at the beginning, but I think a lot of people will do it because they want to have nice things. Like, they want to have money, they want to have time, they want to have all these things, but yet it ends up being such a painful walk of thorns, if you will.
Well, and I think there's a deep, I guess it's irony or creativity on our Lord's part, but there is a almost a perfect correlation between overall happiness and sanctity. And Saint Josemaria has this quote. He says, "If you want to be happy, be holy, and if you want to be really happy, be really holy." right? And if you want to be really, really, really happy, be really, really, really holy. But it's holiness is very difficult, if not impossible, without suffering. You can't carry the cross without carrying the cross. And it looks different in everybody's life, but suffering is the means often of drawing us closer to God and making us more in his image, which is, what does it mean to be a saint? It means to be in the image of God. And what did he do? He picked up the cross. And so it is again, that's the grace that comes from doing something like taking on, starting a company or trying to build something. It is the process and the pain and the suffering and the endurance that goes into it that is totally awful when you're in it and you don't like it very much. But it is shaping you more into the person that God is calling you to be. And so if you don't have that perspective, it gets really, really hard. It's hard as
Yeah.
enough as it is, but that's where God provides you the grace if you respond to it.
It's really fascinating that we always have this kind of like trite saying like God is love, right? And then people don't really think about what that means when if you reflect on it for just a bit, the God is love manifested, his love manifested in literally suffering the most excruciating painful death for us, right? And it's not just all sunshine and rainbows, right? True love is sacrifice effectively, right? So it's like if we want to love God, we have to embrace that sacrifice, that challenge. So it is such an interesting perspective. I really encourage people, if they have not already, to read the book Uniformity with God's Will. It's a very, very small little pamphlet book, basically, that by St. Alphonsus de Liguori, which is incredible. Honestly, life-changing book. If you haven't read it, I would encourage people to check that out. Part of this idea of kind of growing, like going back to prestige, is growing in this and putting in the inputs so that you let God take care of the outputs. There's a lot of things that they may not necessarily be super painful, but they're just kind of like boring and mundane. How do you maintain a commitment to doing those things well so that the outputs can be in God's hands? How do you stick with that stuff when it gets really boring after the excitement has worn off?
Yeah, no, and this is really, really important. So this is, I think one of the fundamental contributions that Saint Josemaria has brought to the lay vocation, brought to professional life. And he looked back at the example of our Lord and Saint Joseph. Is like, why would God incarnate, the creator of the entire universe, spend the vast, vast majority of his life in utter, anonymity in little backwater town of Nazareth doing manual labor? Like, why would that be? That makes no sense at all. Like, he could have just appeared in the desert at age 30 and that would have been fine. And his thesis, St. Josemaria's thesis, was that he did that to show us that the mundane and both the combination of the mundane, ordinary things of life, family, living in a little village, going to work every day, but then also work is a part of the salvific plan of God and is part of our own redemption. I mean, that Jesus was a carpenter or blacksmith and doing mundane tasks as God of the universe. That's completely insane. But that is the example that he gave us. And so part of what we have to see is that the work that we have, and almost in particular the mundane, the value of that work is not in necessarily what it accomplishes. Where the value, the redemptive and salvific value comes is in the love that's put into it. And right, you can imagine that Jesus Christ put full love into the table that he was making or the door frame that he was fixing or whatever. Like that's how he worked. And that is the model that we have. And if that is the vocation that God is calling us to do, because there are mundane things. By the way, that's true in every aspect of our life. That's true in times with our families, and time in marriage, and time. I mean, part of life is the mundane. But we, again, from the input side, have the ability to control the inputs, which is our love and our intention, the kind of a rectitude of intention. Like, why am I doing this? Am I doing this just for whatever outcome, or am I doing this fundamentally because I know this is my vocation? I know this is what God is calling me to do. And I know that this is the path that I can demonstrate love. And in some ways, this is a very tiny little cross that I can pick up, right? There's moments in our lives where God asks us to pick up very, very heavy crosses, a deep suffering, very painful moments. But every bit a part of picking up our cross are these little tiny inconveniences and annoyances in relationships and in the way that we do our work. Like, okay, I don't like to cold call people. All right, well, that's fine. join the club. But that is a very small cross that you are getting the opportunity to pick up with and participate in. And you can do it really well out of love of God because, throughout time, as you know, in the Old Testament, I mean, the reason that Jesus was the sacrifice because he was the perfect unblemished lamb. And everything throughout the Old Testament in terms of the offerings that the Jews were called to bring were always perfect, right? There was the unblemished lamb, separating, sheeps and goats and all of this image that Jesus used. We have to bring our first fruits, our best goods to offering God. And that includes the little report that you need to do for your boss. It's super annoying that you don't want to put together. So I just think the whole question is around what is the understanding of what my work is. It's most people have a very narrow view that work is just what I have to do in order to achieve X goal. And the answer is no, no, no. What God has given you is part of your vocation to sanctify you and get you to heaven. And so
Yeah.
you have an opportunity to put love into that in a powerful way.
Yeah. I mean, that example of just imagining God of the universe literally doing the most simple thing, like making a table, right? That if that doesn't humble us enough to recognize that, we can fill out our report or answer our customer emails with a little more attention to detail and interest, it's I don't know what will. But I'm curious, you are there any particular tactics or things that you do on a regular basis to remind yourself of that importance? Because I can assume it's not maybe over time it becomes a really good habit and you're able to do it more easily. But how do you ensure that you build that habit? Because I mean I
Yeah.
personally have tried to do this with some of the things in recruiting, and it's really
Yeah.
hard. Like how do you remind yourself?
Well, I'm pulling something out. So one, I think this goes back to human reminders. So I just reached in my backpack, right? So I have my little flat little crucifix here. So it's something where, I don't have, if you walk in my office here, it's not like I have a giant, crucifix and, I don't have tons of things in this office that if somebody walked in here who maybe wasn't a Christian, that was just going to totally weird them out. But I do have little things where like when I'm doing my work, I'll have my little cross either sometimes it's in my pocket, sometimes I just kind of slide, put it in a place kind of hidden away, tucked away. That is a reminder to me of what this is for. Like, why am I doing this? Another thing that I have is typically a list of prayer requests. And when I have a task that I really don't want to do, I normally, for example, I've got a friend right now who is seriously in the hospital. And if there, something I'll have something to do today that I really don't want to do. And so when I come to that task, it's going to be for my friend, right? And what you find is that when you have reframe struggles and challenges and annoyances both as an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to grow, because the only way you grow is to do things that that are difficult or you don't want to do. Like that's how you grow. And it's for the sake of somebody else at a service for others. You can endure a lot, right? And you can see it in a better light. So I think, and I remember going back to the cold calling example I gave. There was a project I remember doing where 15 years ago, where I had to cold call a ton of people on a project. And I hate cold calling to the depths, right? It's one of these things where if Dante had known about cold calling, he would have put that somewhere into like, somewhere in the inferno, like you just have to sit there and cold call for eternity. That's how I felt about it. But then as a result, though, I literally had a printed out list of people I was praying for. And for every one of those cold calls, I would think I'm doing it for this person or this intention. And this is a small price to pay to try to make this a heroic prayer. So anyway, there's different things that we could do to challenge ourselves to get out of ourselves and stop being so selfish and thinking about, oh, how hard this is, or oh, this is mundane or bored. It's like, no, moron. This is the moment that God has given you to serve Him and serve others. So, here's your moment to be heroic, right? People have this idea that right? It's like Peter saying, I'll die for you. And then Jesus says, you're going to deny me 3 times, like for small things. And so I think there's these times where we think as a Christian, like I would be a martyr. I would do heroic things for our Lord. And that hopefully is true. But what's actually more practical and real is that God gives us all of these small, annoying things every day. That's where we should be mortifying ourselves. And that's where the suffering and sacrifice comes. God's not calling you necessarily to be a martyr yet. Maybe he does someday, but probably not. But he is calling you to be this very tiny martyr and this very tiny sufferer in these little things, and you're missing them. You're not even seeing them as they come through your day. And so when you change the way that you see your vocation and your daily life and the mundane, you realize that no, God is putting all of these things in front of me that I can grow by, but I just have to have the eyes to see them.
Yeah. No, I love that a lot, man. That's really good. What do you think about a plan of life? I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs, it's just like, I am just so busy. I'm too slammed. I can't do this. I can't do that. How did you achieve this as a CEO of a publicly traded, hotel company? Quick question for all the Catholic business owners listening. Are you running your business, or is your business running you through all of the admin tasks that you're doing on a regular basis? We see so many founders doing repeatable administrative tasks, and that's why we started Paraclete VA. We bridge the gap by connecting you with high-quality, Catholic, and vetted virtual assistants from all around the world who come from our existing network so that we know we can trust them. And so can you. Many of our Catholic Founders Guild members have hired through this service and are using this to offload their finance, marketing, administrative, and other busy work so that they can focus on what really matters and growing their business. It's the stuff that needs to get done but shouldn't be done by you. The cost is simple. Pay $500 on the day the candidate starts and $500 if you're still happy with them after 30 days. Most hires take less than 10 days to fill. Just email admin@catholicfounders.com with a little bit about what you're looking for. We'll send you some candidates, you do some interviews. Most of the time, you'll have your hire in under 10 days, and this way you can start focusing on what really matters. Stop doing the busy work and start moving the needle.
Right. A great question. And I was given a book that a priest gave me when I was about 30 years old. It's a great book. It's a very short book. And you may have heard of Father Jacques Philippe, the French monk, alive, still writes, and he wrote a book called Time for God. And I actually took a group of guys through it even this past year, as part of a little book study group that I have. And there's so many great things in that book about just helping to frame prayer. But one thing that changed my life from that book when I was 30 years old was, in it, he talks about how people say, oh, I just don't have time for prayer. I'm so busy. I have all these things. And his argument is, and it's true in every area of life, it is never, ever about time. Ever, right? The idea that God is calling you to do more than you are capable of doing with your time is obviously completely ridiculous, right? That's not a standard that God holds you to. What it always is a question of priorities. And the reality is that the way that you spend your time is the manifestation of your priorities, right? People might say, no, my family is my priority. Are you spending time with them? Then guess what? They're actually not your priority, right? Well, Jesus is my priority. Do you pray? No. Guess what? He's not your priority. We think our priorities are the things that are in our head, or even things that I write down. But no, priorities are nothing but how you actually spend your time. So, Silas, you showed up for this podcast and you're dressed. You have clothes on, which I appreciate. And my guess is that pretty much every business meeting you've ever been to in your life, you probably had clothes on. I bet every day of school you had clothes on. Now, how did you manage in all of the things that you have going on? How did you manage to always get dressed? Because it's a priority, right? It's one of the things I have to do. Well, what if we put our life of prayer into the same bucket that we have to eat and have to dress and have to use the restroom and all of the essentials of life? It's never a question about time. It's only a question about priorities. And so that's the gut check you have to do. Now, with that is you do, because we're busy and because we have priorities ebbing and flowing, that's why you do have to have structure. You do have to have a plan that you're working through. And I think many times what people do, though, is they attempt to boil the ocean, right? It's something, people do this during Lent. They do it during New Year's resolutions. Like, I'm going to totally change my life, and I'm going to have 15 things that I'm doing for my prayer life. And frankly, as you mature and as you build up habits, yes, you should be expanding the things that you're doing, right? You can, pray multiple times a day. You can, make it to mass more than just on Sundays. You can make it to more often Mass. You can do these things, but you're not going to do them all at the beginning. And the most important part is to come up with a tangible, discrete plan that is progress from where you are today, and be faithful to that in the same way that you are faithful to getting dressed and brushing your teeth and kissing your spouse every day. And then at some point in time, that's integrated in an habitual part of your life, and then you can expand it and continue to add on to it. But the idea that you can have a flourishing life of piety and intimacy with our Lord without a plan is, I think, completely ridiculous. I don't think it's possible, because then you're dictated by your emotions and your circumstances. And that's, by the way, you would never do that with your spouse. Like, you wouldn't, you would never do that.
Yeah.
If you've got to have a strategy and a plan, and because that's also the only way you can hold yourself accountable. It's anyway. So you've got to have a plan and a strategy. Ideally, someone holding you accountable, something that's reasonable, and then build off of that.
I mean, it would be just as ridiculous if somebody is gonna, build a company or running a company and say, hey, we're gonna double in revenue this year, and you say, how are you gonna do that? We're just gonna increase sales. How are you gonna do that? Like, you have to have real plans. Any person who's worth their salt would say, well, that doesn't sound like much of a plan to me. That sounds like just kind of a desire or some kind of a hope and a dream, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing for our
and I think that the other thing is, every once you'll hear the argument, well, I don't want my relationship with God to feel like a bullet point list, right? And there's a spirit about that is true, but it is much easier to have a bullet point plan that I'm doing on a consistent basis, and then my struggle is to make sure that my heart and my intention is in the right place doing it, because I do it, rather than I only want to talk to God, or I only want to spend time in prayer when I feel it emotionally. More fervor on an inconsistent basis is absolutely not more greater intimacy to God than consistency through the ups and downs. It's just how we are built. What God wants for us is to be close to Him constantly in different ways and different shapes and forms. But that just the idea that I am willing to carve out my time every day to spend with you, regardless of how I feel, which, by the way, is what I would want my spouse to say, right? I'm willing to love you and spend time with you, even when I don't really like you very much, or even when we're on a romantic getaway. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, I want to be with you. And so we just have to have that discipline to go do it.
It's also fascinating, the idea of time, because time is something that God created for us, and we only have the current moment, right? So if we can kind of recognize that, this is something I picked up a little bit from Dr. Daniel Tatahe when he was talking about, when he came on the pod, about how he treats his employees and how he has his employees treat their patients, right? Like, that you are a gift to the person in front of you, and likewise them to you, because that's the only, like, they are only one place at one moment in time, and they can only be there. Obviously, with social media nowadays, it's very easy to want to be distracted from that component. But if we can lean into it, that's something very specific that God gave us to be able to gift to others.
Well, and I'll tell you, and I actually gave a talk last week touching on this topic, is that we fail to appreciate the importance of attention and the quality of attention. And I was pulling together a couple of random facts where, for example, there's a friend of mine, a guy named Kevin Majors, who's a doctor at Harvard, who has a program called Optimal Work that was very important to me. I think I mentioned it even in the podcast too. But in it, he talks about how the quality of attention that we give people is actually the bond that we're building, right? So that to the extent that the better quality attention and intentionality of attention we give builds bonds better in a social sense. So then you have this idea that I'm reading this. He's I guess a psychiatrist, but also a philosopher, a guy named Ian McGilchrist, his probably best known book is called The Master and Its Emissary, and talking about how left brain versus right brain thinking. And he's got a new book. It's huge. It's called The Matter with Things. That his thesis is that we've become a culture and society that's based on left brain thinking, and we really need to be right brain thinking. But where this comes out is that the way that we attend to the things around us, the way that we use our attention, actually shapes our reality. At the way that as we pay attention to things, they reveal themselves in the universe differently than they would if we weren't. And then even I think you have these clues that come up now in quantum physics, right? The idea that the way that humans, I don't know if you're familiar with the double slit experiment. I don't know if you're going to get your quantum physics lesson of the day. There's experiments that they do where they shoot photons of light through these little slits, and they're supposed to behave a certain way. And if they are measured by a human, they behave one way. And if they are not measured, they behave another way. And so the way that we attend even to matter in the universe changes creation in the universe itself. And so I think something that as we're making as scientific discoveries and as we learn that the world and the universe is way more weird and way more creative and way more interesting than we've ever imagined, the point of attention is really, really important. And I think particularly in this hyper distracted world that we have, is that something that people fail to appreciate is the quality of attention that we provide bends the world around us, and it bends reality, and it bends our relationships. And we should be thinking about that both in our relationship with God, in terms of how we pray, and blowing out I'm blowing out my rosary because I need to get it done today, versus really being present and being attended. Same thing with our spouses, same thing in our relationships with our business partners, is that we rob people of the attention that they are due, and that would actually both help them and help us flourish. And it's something that and by the way, I am absolutely preaching to myself right now. I'm working on this myself because I'm terrible at this. I'm very good at multitasking, and multitasking is a terrible thing to do in the vast majority of circumstances.
That is really fascinating. It makes me wonder if that's part of the principle of the transcendentals, right? Like even if matter, that's like, we're not talking about another human here. We're talking about just matter, if it behaves differently based on attention, because of with transcendentals, we talked about this a lot on the podcast, but like with unity and just there's just a lot of things that I won't go like on a big rant on this. I want to cover a couple other things, but that is definitely something I'm going to think about. I really appreciate that. What was the name of that book, by the way?
So one is the Optimal Work with Kevin Majors, and then the book by Ian McGilchrist, his shorter book, which is still massive, is called The Master and Its Emissary. It's basically the right brain is the master, should be the master, and the left brain should be the emissary. But we've got them switched. But his big one is called The Matter with Things. It's very long, but it's a very, very important book, because his argument is, if we are a society that's fundamentally focused on our left brain thinking instead of our right brain thinking, then all of these questions of how we see, how we see attention, how do we discern truth, how do we see beauty, all of these are questions that we are somewhat missing in the modern age, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
So, anyway, very interesting.
That is very interesting. I'll have to pick that up. I would like to. There's a lot of things you could talk about, but I think you'd be a very good person to ask about this idea of daring. So I think that I'll just try to set this up a little bit. So as in our current world, we have plenty of opportunities to just kind of like, we don't want to, upset too many people. We don't want to get canceled. There's all this kind of like fear of various things as entrepreneurs, especially. And because we're kind of reliant on I guess you could say, our reputation for our business, right? And that could be maybe firing a client that's mistreating some of our employees, or it could be a whole host of things, honestly. But if we're going to really bring the culture back to God, I'm pretty sure we can't do it by just being like super quiet in the corner type of thing. We kind of have to have a little bit of, I don't know if the word's edginess, or like we have to be daring, if you will. I would just like to get your comments on how we can embody that as Catholic entrepreneurs, and maybe how in particular our faith should actually be the key driver to allow us to pursue that without any fear. A Catholic founder is somebody who recognizes that they are called to be an instrument of God's will in the world. We're not building a business for our own sake. We are simply stewards. If that describes how you think about entrepreneurship, we want you in the Catholic Founders Guild. We're growing an association of Catholic business owners who believe in these things deeply so that we can invest in, buy from, and support one another. We do this through our exclusive membership directory, monthly group calls, and our group chat. But there's a lot more to it than that. The Guild has a lot to offer. The cost is only $10 a month or $100 a year. So if you believe that you were created to create, join the Catholic Founders Guild today. You can do so by going to CatholicFounders.com/subscribe and upgrade to any paid subscription. See you in the Guild.
Right. Well, I think the first thing to that, at least my experience, and this is the part that's difficult, is that my experience is that in business, in relationships, in most things, we overestimate the potential negative outcomes. I think most people have the tendency to view risk only through the lens of the downside and very rarely through the lens of the upside, right? I mean, risk is really, what it really means is volatility, or that you've got a wide range of outcomes. That's what something being risky is. But people tend to think about all of the bad things that happen, and very rarely do they think about what are all the good things that could come from taking a risk. And we've become overall a very risk averse culture. In particular, you've got being canceled. You've got lawyers. You've got people telling you to behave in certain ways. And what I have found in my experience is that the vast majority of the time, the bad things that you imagine could happen, you are overemphasizing those realities. Those appear in your mind bigger than they actually are. I'm not saying that they don't ever exist, but they probably don't exist as large as you think they do. The only reason I say that is because I've I I have enough experiences now where things that people said that I was doing, or stands that I thought that I was taking, people were like, "Oh, this is good. Like you're going to get sued. You're going to get canceled. You're going to have this. You're going to have that." And the answer is zero of that happens. And not to say I've never had bad outcomes on things, but I can honestly say that very, very rarely is taking a legitimately well thought through risk, particularly when you're standing for something that you believe to be true. Very rarely does the eventual outcome not be a great blessing. We may not see it in this life. I mean, there's maybe treasure in heaven. But what I found is that people, both in your company and around you, are inspired by courage. And when something is seen to be a bold step for the right reasons and done with the right attitude, I mean, that we still have to frame these things out of charity and out of justice, out of truth. But people take great hope and encouragement from people willing to step out for the right reasons. And what I found is that what feels like stepping out alone when you make that decision, what actually happens is 5 minutes later, you turn around and you realize there's a ton of people falling behind you, right? You thought you were alone, and you actually weren't. It's just that they needed somebody to lead. And by the way, the only thing that you really have is your reputation. I mean, this does somewhat go back to the prestige point, is that you need to be a single person. You need to be living a unity of life where you've got to not be afraid. Or I mean, that was what John Paul II kept telling everybody, like, be not afraid. And so that's prudential, that requires discernment. But what I can tell people is that's the moment of character building. And that's the moment when people realize that you're someone willing to follow if you're willing to take the heat for making the right decision. So I don't know. I just think people overestimate downsides.
Well, this is a great. I'm currently in a group that we're reading a bunch of the Plutarch's Lives, and a lot of these guys, like, they're able to just inspire their men to follow them because they speak up in one instance, right? It's like you said, people follow you kind of immediately because everybody else is already afraid. But if they have that moment of inspiration, it just takes one little quick thing to kind of get people to pop into action, right, if you will. I would be curious if you have, for, let's say, an entrepreneur, just generally speaking, somebody runs a small business, they're doing several $million a year in sales or revenue or whatever, and their business is relatively established, and they're thinking about how they can bring the culture back to God, basically, how they can bend the culture to God. What are some of the things that, on this kind of daring side, that you would imagine that they could do? What are some of the actions they could take? I'm just kind of curious, in your mind, what are some of those pathways?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one that, I mean, in some ways, it's really dependent upon the vocational calling and that God's given them to do. Because I do get uncomfortable in some ways with this feeling that in order to change the culture, we must be bold and vocal and explicit in what we say, and that we need like that we need to have a crucifix in our logo, and we need to call ourselves Catholic. And for some people, they do, right? And for some people, that is the calling and vocation that they have. And there's certain people that, yes, to be a more visible sort of warrior for Christ in the public domain and the public square is a unique vocation, which, by the way, requires a lot of sanctity, like a lot of sanctity to be able to withstand and be a good example in that and not actually harm the church. But again, what I actually think is that it's mostly about the mundane. It's mostly about the little things in our lives. And again, I think we get this kind of big, kind of gusto of look at these LinkedIn posts that I'm making and look at my social media feed and the reaction that I'm getting to this, and I told those people about the Catholic Church and this and that, and I got into a debate and I told them, like, okay, fine, there's some people that are called to sort of digital missions and sort of be out there, but the vast majority of people are called to be super faithful and lights and influence in the circumstances that God has put them, and not to get overwhelmed or distracted by the bright lights and sort of like these overarching, missions and initiatives. I mean, it does go back a little bit to, Jordan Peterson's or other people, like, just make your bed, clean your room. I mean, I think that's where, for most of us, we get our sanctity and where we get our intimacy with God is just being faithful in these little things. I mean, it's just in the relationships that you have, in the time that you spend, in the priorities that you make. Don't be over romanticized about the big and heroic. It's like start with the simple and the daily and the mundane.
Yeah.
And because if you do that, God calls you and it prepares you for more. Now it's like if I'm hiring some young person who's telling me, like, I'm going to be the CEO someday. I'm like, great. Step one, let's work on like how you dressed today, and let's work on like how you acted in that meeting yesterday where you were on your phone the whole time, and let's work on this report that you gave me that has spelling errors and a bunch of mistakes in it, and you didn't do it very well. So you can have all of the mission driven, I want to like be a CEO for Christ. Like, that's great. You got a lot of stuff here and now that you need to be working on.
Yeah, it's important to take that into account. I do definitely agree with that. What is the exact saying? If we become the people we're called to be, we'll set the world on fire. I think Catherine of Siena, right? And it's like the example of Saint Therese of Lisieux with doing little things. I mean, she lived a very small life in so many ways. Her actions weren't necessarily quote unquote great in the eyes of the world, but look at her today. Like, look at the people who have been inspired by her because of her actions, right? And it sounds like the short answer is it depends, and then it really depends on what exactly God's calling you to, but you just need to lean into whatever it is. And if you're uncertain what that is, usually the answer, and I learned this from an Opus Dei priest, is actually that you're called to minister to whoever's in front of you. You don't have to go searching out some like person on the corner or in another country. The people in front of you are the people you're supposed to minister to. And the same thing with the challenges that you're given each day are the challenges you're meant to lean into and to embrace wholeheartedly, right?
Yeah, well, like I said, God is giving you all the material that you need to be a saint and to flourish. Like, you don't need to go out on this giant mission out. Like, it is all around you. As you sit there, you just have to have the eyes to see it and the heart to sort of to live it and offer that up to God.
I mean, I think there's so many things we could talk about more. We'll have to save some more for next time, but let's end with a quick rapid fire. Who is your favorite entrepreneur?
My favorite entrepreneur, my favorite guy is a guy named Frank Hanna. Frank
He's amazing.
Frank is a very dear friend. We've invested in some deals together, and of all of the, again, I'm getting now old. Of all the sort of my generation and older, he's the one that I admire the most.
Who is your favorite saint?
It's the combo. You gave me the combo early. It's JP2 and Saint Josemaria.
Nice. What's your favorite scripture?
It's in Matthew, where it talks about the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, and they stay, basically where it talks about, like, seek first, my kingdom and my righteousness, and the rest will be given unto you. That verse was a big pivot in my life where I was so worried about success, money, and just the idea that, did I not trust that God was enough for me? Because I was trying to decide where to go, vocational calling, and He was just like, go.
That is also my favorite one. I like that a lot. I'm glad we share that. And then what's your favorite devotion?
My favorite devotion is it's probably it's I don't know, it's probably the rosary. I mean, one thing I really do love in particular during Lent, I do love the stations during Lent.
I've always been really bad at the stations, but I do appreciate how much value there is in them. But I've always been super like, I haven't made the effort to go to Stations of the Cross during Lent, but our family does this thing. I think they still do it, but back on my uncle's farm on Good Friday, we would usually go. We have our own stations that we all built, and we would walk the property if there wasn't 3 feet of snow, and we would go through the stations. That is my biggest memory of Stations of the Cross. But this has been really great, Rob. I appreciate you coming on. I knew this was going to be good because you've obviously done podcasting before, but also you got a lot of experience to share. So I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future, but thank you so much for coming on. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. My favorite takeaways from this particular discussion were doing things so well that it allows us to be considered experts in our field. Doing this gives us prestige, right? Once we have that, God can then use us even more for his purposes. More people will reach out to us because they recognize that we are excellent at what we do. And that means more people can be touched by us, by our lives, by our example of a Christian life. To do this, we must focus on the inputs, right? This is not about pursuing prestige. It's about pursuing doing things so well that it will eventually lead to prestige. The inputs are what matters. God handles the outputs. If we invert this, it's really just pride because we're just pursuing the excellence for our own needs, right? We can have that intention in mind that if I pursue prestige, this will lead to, if I'm humble, it'll lead to more people coming to know God. But it's very important to focus on the inputs and allow God to handle whatever amount of prestige that he gives us. The second thing is how doing the mundane is critical to our own sanctification. When we accept the mundane and we do it well, we are imitating the life of Jesus. He spent 30 years just kind of working away very quietly, completely unknown as a carpenter, and then he only had 3 years of public life, right? We can imitate that, right? Doing the mundane while putting in the effort. God will use us when he wants us to be used, but we need to focus on doing the things that we do well. Something that Rob said in here that just really struck me was that the God of the universe spent 30 years just working away, putting all of his effort and love into his carpentry, into his profession, just small things, fixing a door frame, building a table. You get it. If that doesn't like just strike you right between the eyes, I don't know what will, but really consider that and consider it in your own life. There's a lot more in this conversation that's worth noodling on, but those are my 2 biggest items that I personally took away. I do have a big favor to ask of you guys. Please, if you enjoy this content that we're putting out through the newsletter on Mondays and through the podcast throughout the week, please share this with those people who you think might be interested in learning about it. It's really the only way that we can grow is you sharing it around, giving us a rating on your favorite podcast player, and just generally being like there to support and share this around. This is really, really helpful for us. We are also on YouTube, so if you prefer to watch, you can also subscribe there. It's really helpful. Finally, if you are looking to start a business and want to be surrounded by other Catholics as you get off the ground, consider joining the Catholic Founders Guild today. You can do so by going to catholicfounders.com/subscribe and pick any paid tier that you'd like, and we'll get you included in the group chat, get you part of our whole network that's growing, and we're just always helping each other grow and get our businesses off the ground, as well as get to that 1 million a year in revenue target. As you grow, then you go and you can join Cent and you can become kind of one of the big dogs, right? But we like to help people out as they're getting going. All right, folks, thank you so much for tuning in today. As always, do not forget that you were created to create. God bless you guys, and see you next time on Catholic Founders.